Okay, so now we turn from looking at our good dead British empiricists, John Locke and George Berkeley, to our final dead British empiricist, our good dead friend David Hume, and then our final figure of the modern era, Immanuel Kant, who was a guy who wrote a lot of stuff, died, still dead today, which shows that philosophy is universal. All these philosophers are philosophers, and they die. There's a warning in there somewhere, I'm sure. A little background for David Hume, or DH as no one called him. He was born in 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland. He attended Edinburgh University, conveniently enough, and like any young person at this time, or typically young men, because sexism was pretty rampant in those days, he went to the cultural capital of Europe, which of course was Paris, France. Anybody who wanted to be anybody would go to Paris to try to be somebody. And he wanted to achieve literary fame. So someone we could, recognize today. He wanted to be famous. And he wrote a work called A Treatise of Human Nature, which was met with the cruelest of all fates, which is not mockery or derision or bad reviews, but complete and utter indifference. Fortunately, he did not give up. In 1745, he tried to get a job at Edinburgh University, but because of his skeptical views, they said, no thanks, Dave. Also, your book is pretty indifferent. In 1748, he engaged in a classic literary tactic, which is something I've done myself, which I highly recommend. If you put a lot of work into something and it doesn't succeed, don't give up on it, repackage it, and resell it. But it's something they did, to give an example outside of books. The movie Home Alone was originally released with a great lack of success. So they repackaged it, released it at Christmas, and it became a classic movie. And so similarly, like when I read articles for journals, back when I had to publish to get tenure and promotion, now I'm at the end of the game. If I didn't get accepted in one place, I just rewrite a little bit and send it somewhere else. And eventually I find something bad enough to accept my badness. So what he did is he revised the treatise into an inquiry concerning human understanding in 1748, and in 1751 revised another part of it into a treatise, into an inquiry concerning the principles of morals. And they became quite successful, and they're still in print to this day. Although being dead, he gets no royalties from it. But maybe every time we speak his name, he gets like a little alert on his celestial phone. Ding, ding, they're talking about me again. Fame at last, fame at last. In 1752, he tried to get a job at the University of Glasgow. Again, no success. In 1757, he published his Natural History of Religion, and Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion was published after his death. Now, his most successful work during his lifetime was written in 1754 to 1762, was a 6-volume history of England, which was very successful. In 1763, he went to Paris as the assistant to the English ambassador and became a bit of a celebrity. And he met and corresponded with various notables during this time, including our own Benjamin Franklin. They had some conversations about electricity, booze, and ladies. And his writings are actually, much of his correspondence, it's actually pretty interesting. He's a pretty interesting character. There's one story which may not be true, but supposedly he was caught in the bedroom of somebody's wife by her husband, and apparently leaped from the window into a tree while being shot at with pistols. Fortunately, back then, pistols had one shot, so his survival was more likely. But action hero, adventurer, philosopher. And was interestingly very well liked and regarded as very kind, and somewhat ironically was nicknamed St. David because of his kindness. And the street he lived on, which is still there today, is now called St. David. So if you ever go to Scotland, you can go and walk the street that he walked. His tomb is there, and his tomb is a mess. Apparently people like to go and throw bottles and cans and trash into it. I like to think that they're honoring him by throwing bottles, pouring one out for Dave, which I think he would appreciate. So what was Dave up to? Well, like most of the dead guys at this time, before they were dead, he regarded the foundations of philosophy as a mess. It's the thing we heard from Hobbes, Descartes, everyone. Philosophers have been doing all this stuff for a long time, but it's still not very solid because everything is still in debate. There's no matter you say, oh yes, problem solved, move on to next problem. So, what he wanted to do was this. Like everyone else, he wanted to address that problem, to solve the foundation problem. One thing he brought that's kind of new to the game was this. He believed the problem arose because we did not adequately understand human nature. So one of his important shifts was, instead of like Descartes focusing on, say, knowledge, his focus was on human nature, to figure that out. And he thought that once you figure out the nature of the beast, us, then all the rest would be easy. But of course, whenever, as everyone knows, when someone says, hey, it's gonna be easy, you know it's not gonna be easy. It's gonna be very hard. So, objective, build that solid foundation. Methodology, examine human nature, figure out how that works, and then problem solved. Now, so one interesting thing about his approach is, in a way, he's doing sort of a precursor to modern psychology. He's, as we'll see in much of what he writes, he says in a way we can't really answer the question like what there is. We can only answer questions like why do we think that? And some people have said he's doing kind of a psychoanalysis of people, figuring out why do we believe the things we believe. So we'll begin with his epistemology, his theory of knowledge, and his metaphysics, his theory about the stuff that is and the stuff that isn't. Like most of the dead guys at this time, he really, really focused on ideas. It was kind of a thing. It's kind of like, I guess, the, actually I don't know what's in it. It used to be like Angry Birds, and it was Candy Crush. I don't know, what is the latest game, latest smartphone game now? Crushing Birds? Candy Birds? Tender? Yeah, I don't know, I don't know what it is anymore. No, tragic lack of knowledge there. Part of my failure of my epistemology. Anyways, the ideas were big. They were as Angry Birds and Candy Crush were, and perhaps still are. So what's his theory of ideas? Well, like a lot of the other dead guys, he really likes working out categories of things. So, firstly, he begins with perceptions. And these are the contents of our consciousness. So an example of a perception, well, all you gotta do is look at your consciousness. Boom, there it is. And he claims there are two types of these perceptions. Type 1, impression. The impression is your original experience. So for example, well, two examples of this. One would be your own psychological states, like feeling happy, knowing that you're happy, or feeling hungry or tired. Also, of course, it would include things such as original experiences, like what's happening right here, right now. So the impressions would be, to use kind of a literal analogy, it's like when, literally an impression. It's like having like some clay and pushing a seal or wax and pushing a seal into it. That would be the impression, the original thing. So the impression is that immediate experience of the senses or what's going on inside. Now, the second type of perception is what he calls ideas. He says in this phrase, they're less lively copy of ideas. Oh, sorry, impressions. So what he thinks of it is this. Going back to the analogy, it's kind of like when the stamp is hitting the wax, then that is the impression, the original. And then, of course, what happens is the idea would be a less lively copy. Going with that analogy, it'd be like taking, well, actually, we can use a better one. Maybe. It's like when they print back when they used to print books with like printing presses. And the first impression would be like the original. And then if you take that and copy that, like take it today and then photocopy it, that would be like the idea. It's the copy of the original. And so it'd be essentially things like memories. So what you're hearing, right here, right now, would be the impression, and then recalling what happened, before would be the ideas. Now, Hume thinks, being an empiricist, that every idea a person's got traces back to some impression. So it all goes back to that. And he puts forth a challenge. He says, and Hume is pretty consistent about this. He sort of lays out, here's how you prove me wrong. This is all you have to do. Now, you may regard his conditions as kind of unfair, but he says, this one does seem fair. He says, prove me wrong, give me an idea that doesn't come from an impression, that comes from, well, the options are basically nowhere, ideas from nowhere. And I think I've had some ideas like that. Or coming from, like, being innate somehow, to the alternative. But Hume believes that you can trace every idea back to some impression. It has some genesis or origin story. Which would be a good question. Could you take an idea and show that it did not come from an impression? And of course, Descartes, someone like Descartes would say, yeah, innate ideas. And Hume would say, nope. And that's one of our sort of ongoing battles. Can you have ideas that don't come from the senses? Which is the core battle between the empiricist, it all comes from the senses, or in your mind, and the rationalist. So he's worried about that. Is everything in here, can you, if you check its papers, idea, build that wall around your mind and check papers, would every idea have a stamp, an impression stamp on its passport? Yeah, Hume thinks so. And the challenge would be trying to find an idea that just came out of nowhere, or was just sort of built in. I wonder what Donald Trump's position would be. I guess he'd probably want to keep out the wrong impressions. Build a great wall. And Bernie Sanders would want to share the ideas, because 1% of the people control 99% of the ideas. I don't know, I'd probably ask them that. That's not really quite doing what. Although Bernie looks like a guy who's taken some philosophy, probably a lot of philosophy.
He knows all about Descartes.
Yeah, he probably knows that kind of stuff. He probably knew Descartes, but I don't know. Now, what can the mind do? Yeah, because the simple view that this stuff just comes like pouring into our head, like Legos being thrown into a playpen. The good question is, what can the mind actually do with that stuff? Now, he thinks that there's no ex nihilo creation of ideas. You just can't have an idea come out of nothing. And so creativity is essentially just rearranging stuff that's in there. My analogy I like to use is the Lego playpen. It's like the mind is like a kid in a playpen, and then Legos are thrown into the pen. That's like so the playpen is like the mind, and the kid is like, I guess, the mind too. And then the Legos being thrown in are the impressions we get from the world to become ideas. And so the kid can't like manufacture his own Legos. All he can do is arrange the Legos in new ways. So any new idea would not be a new simple idea, but would be a new complex idea. Now, of course, people will say things like, well, people have new ideas. Elon Musk, new ideas. Facebook guy, new idea. But then Hume would say, well, if you go and analyze that, is it really a new idea? Well, you get a car, which is an old idea, and electricity, which is even older. And you might say, well, it's a new combination of things. Electric car that's really expensive. And similar with Facebook, you have web pages, you have MySpace, Friendster, good times. I think I still have a MySpace account somewhere, maybe a Friendster, somewhere out in the void, no idea. I don't even like to look at it anymore, my shameful past. Actually, just being on MySpace was a shameful thing. So we'd say, yeah, those are not entirely new, they're combinations of old ideas. But it does raise an interesting question. Could there be a truly original idea that came from nothing? Then, of course, pushing it back, you kind of have to wonder, like, okay, if we look at stuff, how do we get ideas? And people that are rational would say, well, where do we get justice from? Do we see justice out there? How do we build that? And the rationalists would say, well, then you gotta have these innate ideas, you can't get them from out there. So kind of the argument is, empiricists say, yeah, anything that we got, we can get from out there. And the rationalists say, no, you can't. So it kind of comes down to that intuition. Do you have, can everything you get come from your senses? And Hume says, you betcha. Well, I wouldn't say that. He would think it. Now, he also thinks, going along with things that Locke and Berkeley said, if you don't have the appropriate senses, you can't have the associated ideas. So someone who's blind would have no ideas of color. I mean, they could learn, color theory, descriptions of wavelengths and so forth. And similarly, someone who's deaf could have no idea of sound. I mean, they could learn about theories, read about theories of wavelengths and so forth, and they could even become a composer, but they would never have an idea of sound itself, or so he claims. Which would be kind of an interesting question. People have sometimes wondered, if you were deaf, can deaf people, can they dream in sound? Do they have sound in their dream? Or are their dreams always silent? And would they know?
People dream in color.
Yeah. I think, from what I've heard, no. So maybe that would be evidence that, some evidence that he's right. Because if it was sort of built in, you could dream of, the mind could generate its own stuff. So kind of interesting test. I guess, presumably, people would dream of whatever they've experienced. Now he brings forth what could be looked at as, we'll call it today, kind of associationist psychology. And like our good dead friend Locke, he accepts a form of atomism of ideas. Here's the idea. When we looked at our good dead friend Newton, well, didn't look at him, we looked at his ideas. Although his bones are probably still around. But we saw, like, his view is that you get space, a place where we keep all our stuff. And then you have the particles in space that combine to make more complicated things. And many of these philosophers, they like that model. They said, oh, if space works like that, by analogy, maybe the mind does. And so he has kind of a mental atomism. That experience is composed of these atoms. And what he tried to do was basically do in the mind what Newton did in the world. So Newton worked out his, the famous Newtonian stuff. And he wanted to create essentially a science of psychology that would have all the laws governing those particles. So just like we have laws about the motion of objects, combination of objects, he wants to do an actual science of psychology, to have the laws and rules governing how that stuff works. And it's something people are still working on today, trying to figure out how all that stuff works. My own hypothesis is, of course, that people do stuff no one knows why, and I've never been proven wrong. And what he wants to find, and this will inform the rest of his work, he wants to find the bond of union, or in his phrase, some gentle force that links ideas together. So he wants to find to use the analogy, kind of a physics or a psychics of ideas. Just like in the physical world, scientists are looking for the forces that control the physical world, electromagnetism, gravity, etc. He's trying to do a similar thing for the mind, which is, a good approach. Now, one thing he finds, and something we now know today, of course, is that we tend to associate ideas. For example, we associate smoke with
fire.
Yeah, and bacon. And barbecue. We associate injury with pain,
Oh, yeah.
and not with, daisies, unless you have really painful experiences with daisies. And we associate Villanova with winning. Probably the best game in a long time. Best game ever. Someone, the thing about, it's like game, no matter where you play, somebody's going to lose. Because it's like life. So Hume thinks there's connections between ideas, associations, and he's trying to work out the system of how this works. And he claims there are three relations between our ideas. So any connection between our ideas, he believes, we can distill down to those three. To use an analogy, it's like the forces in physics, electromagnetism, gravity, electroweak, electrostrong, etc. And depending on which theory of physics you've got different basic forces. And they're trying to find like the unified, total or grand unified theory that explains it all. So Hume says there are the following three relations. First, friend zone. No, different type of relation. Resemblance, that similar ideas tend to be associated. For example, we connect, say, donuts and muffins, because they're a similar thing. We connect pencils and pens, boots and shoes, hats and caps, pants and shorts, which seems reasonable. Secondly, contiguity. Ideas that are proximal in space and time tend to be associated. So, for example, we associate, say, Tharp Street with Ocala. We associate Tennessee with Appalachian Parkway. We associate this room with the room next door. Thirdly, cause and effect. When one event regularly follows another, we tend to associate their ideas. So we associate, for example, fire and smoke. We associate ice and coldness. We associate, getting stabbed with pain. And so he thinks that those are the three relations. Now, is he right about that? Do we use resemblance to sort of smush ideas together?
Yeah.
Yeah, contiguity, that's probably how we navigate in space and time. And cause and effect, it's how we, get through and avoid death. Now, Hume, as we'll see in a bit, has quite interesting causation, and he creates quite a lot of trouble that persists to this day. But before we get to that, we look at the relations of ideas and matters of fact. Now, all the dead guys we looked at, for the most part, focus quite a bit on this division, namely the idea between things that are a priori truths, things that we know by pure reason, and things that are a posteriori truths, things we know from experience. Now, pretty much all the dead guys, except both. If you would ask, David Hume, are there some things we know by pure reason, without experience? And he'd say, yeah. Yes, Descartes, there are some things we know by empirical experience. Descartes would say, sure, why not? Oh. Where they disagree, of course, is whether you can know about the world with pure reason or not. And Descartes thought you could. You could prove your own existence, God's existence, all kinds of stuff. And Locke thought, no, you can't do that. So did Berkeley. Basically all the empiricists saying, no, you can't do that. And all the rationalists saying, yes, we can. And the empiricists saying, no, you can't. Now, what is his division? Well, he claims all of our objects of reason, all the stuff we think about, can fall into two categories: relations of ideas and matters of fact. So what's the difference? Well, relations of ideas would include such things as, well, geometry, algebra, arithmetic, logic. These are things that are intuitively or demonstrably certain. They're things you can prove by pure reason. Why? Well, because they're necessary truths. And if you deny them, it results in a contradiction. For example, we can go back to the usual examples, the usual suspects. If I draw a triangle and hide it, and I say, how many sides does it have? You can, of course, say,
3.
Yeah, 3, because if it doesn't have 3 sides, it's not a triangle. And so we know that without experience. And similarly, 2 plus 2 being 4, 4 being larger than 1. These are all things that are not only true, but necessarily true. Now, how then can you still be an empiricist? Well, here's how. Hume says, yeah, you can know all that stuff by pure reason. You can sit down, you can do geometry all day without ever, having to do an empirical. You don't have to go and like look at triangles, see if they have three sides. You don't have to go and find like the number 2 and see that 2 is empirically bigger than 1. And he says those are purely matters of ideas. But, he says, they don't tell us anything about the world. I mean, to go with the obvious example, if someone says, I have a triangle in my backpack, and they say, how many sides does it have? You would say, 3. But if they said, what color is it? Hey, you have to guess, or how big it is. So, one thing is a relation of ideas. By definition, triangles have 3 sides. Now, so he thinks that these relations of ideas are things we can know just, by pure reason. But the problem with them is this. They don't tell us anything about what exists. Again, go with the triangle thing. If someone claims to have a triangle, if they've got one, it's got 3 sides. But you don't know if they really have a triangle, and if they got one, you don't know what color it is, what size it is, what type of triangle it is, because you have to go in and look. Which takes us to matters of fact. For Hume, a matter of fact is this. If you deny a matter of fact, it's not a contradiction. To illustrate, if I say a triangle doesn't have 3 sides, it's a contradiction, because I'm saying a 3-sided figure doesn't have 3 sides. But if I say the triangle is not blue, no contradiction, because there's nothing about triangle that requires blueness. Now if I say the blue isn't blue, contradiction. But if I say the triangle isn't blue, no problem. So, a reason can't tell us whether a matter of fact is true or not. So, if someone says, I have a triangle in my backpack, no matter how you reason, you won't be able to figure out if they do have a triangle, and if they do, what type it is, what color it is, etc. You have to know about the external world. So the way we learn about these is through experience, and often through bad experience. And he gives a couple examples. He says, imagine, Adam, when he's first created. And he thinks that if, when Adam was first created, he's looking at the water, he wouldn't be able to tell from the fluidity and transparency of water that if he jumped into it and breathed it in, it would kill him. Because you can't reason that out just by looking at water. It'd be handy if we could. You'd look at it and say, yep, that would totally kill me. Second example, he cannot infer from looking at the fire that the fire would harm him and kill him. We can't tell by looking at things whether they'll kill us or not. What we have to do, of course, is experience the pain. Taste the pain, like tasting the rainbow, except words. I think that was originally Skittles' original marketing consideration, taste the pain. And they thought, who's going to buy that? A very small crowd of masochists, I suppose. Yeah, so his view is basically, we have to figure out how the world works by empirical observation. Again, this kind of goes to the core of the question of, the sciencey thing. Could we sit down with equations and work out the nature of the world purely, mathematically? Or do we have to go and actually, empirically observe it? Now, of course, when you're doing science of any sort, there's always, there's mathematics, and then there's always the thing we have to go and empirically confirm it. But the question would be, could you actually know about reality just by doing math? Now, one example where scientists seem to think we can prove stuff without actually going and looking is the classic thing of parallel worlds, alternative worlds. Because by their very nature, if they're not part of our reality, you can't visit them. They're not accessible. And so you can't empirically prove they exist because you can never see them. Now, of course, someone might say, well, couldn't we travel to them? Then you'd say, okay, yeah, then you can prove that way, but that'd be empirical proof. But there are some who claim if you do the mathematics, it shows there has to be parallel or other universes. And they think pure math can do that. And it's a good question. Can you prove stuff just by doing enough math, or do you have to go and look? And we're still in that debate today. Now, Hume thinks that there's a gap, an unbreakable gap. How so? Well, relations of ideas are certain. You can know that 2 + 2 is 4. The triangles have 3 sides. But, he claims, they tell us nothing about the world. But we can apply it to the world. You could say, well, okay, if I've got a desk that's a square, it's got 4 sides. That's true. And you can do math, useful to engineering and so forth. But he claims by itself it tells us nothing about the world. What we need then is matters of fact, which tell us about the world, but he believes are forever uncertain. So we have certainty in stuff that doesn't tell us about the world, and uncertainty in stuff that tells us about the world. Which ties into the rest of his views, because he thinks that, as we'll see, Hume makes famous what's called the problem of induction. That whenever you go from what you observed to what you haven't observed, you're always making a leap, and you can always be wrong, that everything is always uncertain. Which makes, and as Hume sees it, all of science is like that. So whenever you're making conclusions about the world, no matter how careful you are, you can always be wrong. And pretty consistently we've proven that to be true, because we get stuff wrong quite a bit. But, gee, look what happened to that bridge. I guess that didn't work. Before pressing on to his theory of causation, anything about the stuff so far that needs more stuff?
So, saying when talking about the situation with Adam, so would that be innate? Like, if you went to a lake, he just got in, the first thing he did was swim. So he had the innate idea to swim, or?
Well, Hume would say that he'd see the lake. That'd be a good question. What did Adam? If there's a person, what do they do? They saw like a lake. How did they have to like work? Because he's great as an adult. I hope presumably God would like maybe load in some info for him, like don't need that. Yeah, it's a good question. Like, what would he know? And Hume would say that if he looked at the lake and God didn't tell him, like, hey, by the way, Adam, that will kill you. Don't stick your head into there for too long, otherwise you'll die. If he didn't know, he'd have to figure it out. And I guess kids have to too. I assume kids, they have to figure out water. They stick your head in, and then like, I can't breathe. Yeah, I guess kids would provide our best example of how they have to figure out the world. And kids seem to figure out to learn everything the hard way, or by observing other people doing it the hard way. Because they say intelligence is learning from your mistakes, wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes. That's why you always want someone up front, show you how all the dangerous stuff works. Yeah, my video game group, it's always our guy, Dave. Dave's our guy. He finds out how things kill us. Okay, that's how I killed Dave. We don't do that. Thank you, Dave. And he has a knack for finding all the dangerous stuff. Like he just runs that in the middle, and then boom, there we go. But that's a super important job. Very important. It does take guts. Or it has bad spatial awareness. But anyways, theory of causation. Now, what Hume wants to find, and it's something that people have been seeking since before Hume, and are still seeking today, which is this. He wants to clarify the meaning of power, force, energy, or most importantly, what's called a necessary connection. Now, the idea of necessary connection is this. In relations of ideas, it's pretty easy. For example, there's a necessary connection between being triangular and having 3 sides, because it's by definition. We also think there are, necessary connections among, other ideas, mathematics, geometry, etc. And what Hume was trying to do, and this has been, a quest going on before Hume and still going on, is find a necessary connection between things. For example, we can take basic science stuff. Suppose you get some water and you want some tea. How do you make the tea? Yeah, you apply heat to water, you get hot water, and it boils at 100 degrees centigrade, and tea. which is boiling water with plant leaves in it, or some type of stuff in it. Yeah, and we think that there's a necessary connection between heat and boiling. We think if we take heat applied to water, that, assuming the water, normal temperature and pressure, the water will always boil at 100 degrees centigrade. In fact, we learned that in our science classes. We also think, for example, that metals like silver and gold and so on, and copper, are conductors. Your electricity goes in and electricity goes through, maybe with some loss, but we think it always works that way. We don't think that copper will act as an insulator, that it will block the flow of electricity. Similarly, we think we have explanations of things like earthquakes and tsunamis and medicines and biochemistry, things like we think we know like how mitochondria work. Now, a good question, of course, is how do we find that necessary connection? What is it that we find that shows to us that there is a necessary connection between 100 degrees centigrade and water boiling, such that there is a real connection? Now, what we have, of course, is observation. Every time we've applied it, it boils. But the question is, what is the necessary connection? Can we see can we gaze into the mechanism of the universe and see how it works? Or to use a computer metaphor, can we gaze into the code and see the coding there, see how that works? And Hume tries to find that. So his goal is basically to figure out what we mean by necessary connection, what we mean by like power, like the power to boil water. So his approach is essentially, again, psychological. He's going to look at how we do what we do and see what that justifies. Now he claims this. If we go with our impression of external objects, crudely put, what we're seeing and hearing and feeling and so forth, he claims we never observe the necessary connection. For example, I use the example of badly drawn billiard balls. And pool is actually different from billiard. I always thought they were the same, but apparently they're different games. They look very similar. And I don't care enough to really, I looked it up once because I wondered about that. And it turns out that billiards is not pool, pool is not billiards, but very similar. So billiard table, not a pool table. But the basic principles apply. Now, think of like a game of pool. I don't use pool because I don't understand billiards. I assume it's like cricket or something. I think you're allowed to hit people with a stick, so it makes it more exciting. I'm just guessing. I'm guessing about that. I think all games are more exciting for that option. Like tennis and golf. Golf should allow, mortal golf bat, where you're allowed to swing clubs on people. That would really soup it up. I mean, that's how Tiger Woods' wife was playing it. She played with a club on Tiger. I think she won that round. So you have someone playing, pool, and they hit the ball, and they break, and you see the ball scatter. Now, looking at it, we'd think, well, I can see the causation. I see the ball, it gets hit by the pool cue, and it scatters around. But Hume says this. He says, we don't actually see the necessity. Because when we gaze upon it, we see the cue, the balls move, they scatter around. But no matter how much we look, we never see necessity. We just see stuff happening. Now, our time provides an even better way of looking at this, because we know about computer animation. Now, suppose someone created a computer animation of billiards or pool, and it looked photorealistic, and you gazed upon it. Would you be able to tell the difference between real pool with the necessary connection there and the computer-generated image that's perfectly photorealistic? Would you be able to look at it and say, ah, yes, I see the necessary connection here, but aha, good effort, but it looks perfectly like the real thing, except I don't see the necessary connection. No, it looks exactly the same. Even though, of course, in the computer-generated one, there is no necessary connection because it's just images. So Hume says, no matter how we look, we just see balls on the table. We never see a necessary connection. And he's right. I mean, in fact, what would it look like? Would it be like, you know, little glowy energy lines or something? I don't even know what we'd be looking for. Now, he does, of course, try to sort out, maybe we can try to find it, because he's a pretty careful guy. Well, was, because he's pretty dead. So he considers this. Maybe we can find it in our internal impressions. If we look within, maybe we can find that necessary connection that ties it all together. And again, one reason why he wants this is because if we want to be certain about matters of fact, we need that necessary connection. Because we can be sure about triangles. You get a triangle, it's got 3 sides, guaranteed. But what about boiling water? Will 100 degrees always boil water? Will copper always be a conductor? Will the Earth always orbit the sun? And Hume wants to find the necessary connection, because if we could find that, we can say, yeah, that is how the universe works. 100 degrees always boils water. Problem solved, certainty achieved. But Hume thinks we can't, and here's why. Now, he considers the following scenario. We may think that we have the power that enables us to move. For example, just moving the hand. Also to think of ideas. You can try this yourself. Think of like an idea. Combine some ideas. Combine like pizza with some pepperoni. Or vegetables if you're a vegetarian. Or squirrels if you're a squirrel terrier. I think it's the person who eats only squirrels. It could be a thing. Probably is. Probably a website devoted to it. And if there's not one now, there will be one soon. So we think we understand like the connection. We think I move my hand, okay, I move my hand. I think of a picture of a polar bear in a blizzard, and so I create these ideas. But Hume says we still don't see the necessary connection. How so? Well, he lays out the following problems. First problem is our old friend, the mind-body problem. If we go back to our good dead friend Descartes, the problem is, well, you got a ghosty mind, and the ghosty mind supposedly controls the physical body. And the question is, how does the ghost work that controls? Now, Descartes says, in a way, it's so mysterious that a power to move mountains or move planets in their orbits would be no more mysterious. In a way, he's kind of right, because if you have the power of your ghost to move your body, that seems such like a miraculous power that it really would be no more miraculous to be able to move entire mountains or entire solar systems. The idea being, if you accept that it can, the ghost can, incorporeal stuff can control matter, why not like large scale? It's going from ghosts can control matter to ghosts can control mountains or something would not be as big of a leap as going from ghosts can move the matter stuff. Or so it goes. Now, the gist of the problem though is this. We have no understanding, he claims, of how the mind moves the body. Utterly mysterious. So, his point is, this cannot be a model that shows a necessary connection. Because we go in, you can try it yourself. You move your hand, and no matter how you think, you don't find a necessary connection, how that works. It just happens. And so he claims we don't see it. So, being an empiricist, no evidence for it. Second argument. And this is my badly drawn hand and my very badly drawn liver, although it looks kind of like a bike helmet, kind of. Or a bird, or who knows, whatever. Now, we can move our hands voluntarily, but can we move our liver voluntarily? Can you crank it up, to clean stuff out, like, oh, I shouldn't have eaten all those Krispy Kremes, liver, switch it to overdrive. Well, that would be handy. Clean that stuff out of there. But Hume raises an interesting point, that we our will can influence our fingers, but not our liver or our spleen, and we're not really aware of why that's not the case. I mean, some might say, well, you've got nerves, the voluntary nervous system running to it, but then the question to me is, well, why does it work like that? And so Hume says, once again, we don't understand why one works and the other doesn't. We don't see a necessary connection. So thirdly, he claims, he was aware that we have, he's aware of like muscles and nerves and so forth, and we can lay out the physiology of it. But he claims that what happens is we will a particular event, and then through, like moving our hand, and then through a whole series of events that happens, but we don't have an understanding of how that works. It just happens. We don't see anywhere in there, no matter how much we lay out the story, like brain, neurons, nerves, muscles, bones, we still don't see the necessary connection in there. We just see one thing followed by another. So he concludes that this power is completely unknown. We don't have, any understanding of it, and the reason why we think we've got it is entirely by a matter of experience. We learn by experience, okay, I can move my hand, but I can't control my liver. I can't control my skin. I can't like make it grow back faster or change color, which would be kind of handy. Grow back faster would be really useful. That'd be very useful indeed. Kind of Wolverine deal going on. That would make life a lot easier. Being unkillable. I'd probably still look both ways before crossing traffic, but I'd be a little less worried about it. And I'd probably eat more Krispy Kremes. So he claims that if we go look in our own minds, we don't see it. So if that doesn't work, maybe we can look outside and see it there. No, before moving to the outside, is Hume right? No matter how we look, do we find that necessary connection? Do we understand that power? Yeah, it seems like stuff happens. And science can give us, like, if you take anatomy and physiology, you get mechanisms, brain, nerve, muscle, etc. But we still just get that from experience. We still don't know, like, what is the power behind that. Now, when it comes to normal stuff, like our hands, outside stuff like plants growing, wind blowing, sun shining, microwaves microwaving, fire burning, we think we understand all that. We suppose we perceive the connection. We boil water and we say, we do it in, K through science class. I remember one of the things I remember from science class is boiling water. Woohoo! Science. Because it doesn't cost a lot, just need water and some fire. Keep experimenting. And we think we understand all that stuff. But as Hume notes, in the case of extraordinary stuff, like earthquakes, pestilences, etc., then we see it as kind of mysterious. He's writing the 1700s. He says in those cases, we typically assign a supernatural cause. God is the cause of it. But Hume makes a good point. Namely, that the extraordinary, the things that are attributed to supernatural causes, are really no different than the normal stuff. The only difference is basically the extraordinary just occurs less often. So he would say, if you have normal stuff, like we see grass growing all the time, so it seems perfectly normal. We think we understand why grass grows. But if we have a really unusual event, like before we understood eclipses, like an eclipse happens, we think of that as something extraordinary. But Hume says, well, if you think about it, the extraordinary is no different from the normal. It's just this happens so much that it becomes, normal. But if we try to find the power behind it, we still don't see it, or so he claims. We don't find any connection. Now, then how do we sort this stuff out? That's what he claims. So far we said kind of by elimination. You look inside, you don't find necessary connection. You look outside, you don't find any necessary connection. And given his rule about empirical sources, that means that it's not inside, it's not outside, it's nowhere. You can't find it. So what do we do? Well, what he lays out is this as a continuation of his analysis. Suppose you have a single instance of something occurring you haven't experienced before. We could go to, we could take a real case. Imagine like when you're you got a kid, a baby, and the first time they touch a hot stove. Now, from that first experience, do they understand like the power there, so to speak? No, I mean, basically, what do kids often do? They touch that stove and they might do it again because they're not sure if it's going to keep hurting them. They may try again just to be sure. Sometimes, when you find sometimes things do the same thing over and over, and sometimes they don't. It's kind of like, sticking a fork into the light socket. First time you get zapped. You knock out the circuits. Second time you do it, you don't get zapped again. Assuming you survive the first encounter. So, or we could go with using a non-baby one. Imagine you're in the lab and you've created a new compound, and you poke it with it's in a beaker. You poke it with a glass rod, and it emits like a glow and a sound. Does that tell you what it's going to do next? No, maybe you poke it again, and it does that again. Maybe it sues you for harassment. You don't know what it's going to do. Yeah, but from one instance, we don't know what's going to follow next. It happens one time. Who knows? A occurs, B occurs. Who knows what occurs next? Now, the same occurs, of course, as we saw with the mind and the body. That we observe, we think, you will like your hand moving or getting a roast beef sandwich, it occurs, but we still don't see the connection. So, Hume takes the view that we never see any connection. It's just one thing following another. And he claims his conclusion is we never got that. The notion of power or connection or necessary connection has no meaning whatsoever. We have no foundation for that. We have the words, but essentially they refer to nothing. Now, at this point, you think maybe he would just give up, say, okay, we're talking about nothing, move along, nothing to see here. But he's got to explain why we do that. Because do we, as a matter of fact, do we talk about causation? Do we talk about, when you want to cook popcorn, what do? Yeah. And we think it will do that. It'll cook it for us. So the question is, psychologically, why do we do that? And here's his answer. Now, with experience, without experience, we can't predict, beyond what's immediately present to us. Again, going back to the example, you're in the lab, you mixed up some chemicals, and boom, you get some strange metallic mass in the beaker, poke it, because if something's strange, the only thing to do is poke it with a stick, see what it does. Or better yet, get Dave to poke it with a stick and see what it does. Here you go, Dave. See what its capabilities are. You kind of step back out of likely burst radius. And so he pokes it, and it goes, boom, emits a flash of light. Now at that point, of course, you don't know. But then, of course, if you poke it again, it does the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. What would you tend to think? It just keeps happening. Yeah, you think, wow, that's what it does. You poke it and it goes, boom, and lights up. I wonder how we can mark it. Maybe like shoes. Put them on the bottom of shoes. Call them light walkers. And people can walk around and it goes boom, boom, boom. And you'll be driving parents. They did have some. They had the ones, the light up ones, which parents hated, because you add a noise to that. Kids will love it. Parents like it even more. But what he thinks what we do is eventually through experience, we start believing that there's a connection. Essentially, What it works is basically as a habit. We become habituated. For example, we can go, again, we go back to the, like we said, like the example, you make a substance, you poke it with a thing, and it lights up and makes a sound. It does that over and over and over and over again. Hume is an example of billiard balls. First time you encounter billiards, stick hits the ball moves, happens again and again and again and again and again. And eventually you think, the stick moves the balls. That's how it works. Now, so for Hume, here's basically how we, work out causation as he sees it. First time something happens, again, we don't know. You poke it with a thing and you ask what's going to do next, and you say, don't know. Do it again, lights up, and you keep doing it, you're like, I guess that's what it does. Now, it does raise the question, which is this. What's the difference between the first time you do it and the 75th time?
To look for some changes, to see if anything changes.
Yeah, I mean, you're testing it. But suppose you saw like someone took pictures of it, and they put pictures on the table, and you were asked to tell the difference between the first picture and the 75th picture. And they're not numbered or time sequenced. Could you tell the difference? No, because nothing seems to change. Every time you poke it, it lights up. But at a certain point, after a certain number of pokes, you start thinking, when I poke it, it's going to light up again. And it may be, different people, of course, have different, I guess, levels of, acceptance. Like the first time, you'd be like, maybe it won't. Second time, third, and maybe like the 20th or 30th time, you're like, okay, that's pretty well established. But there's really no difference, because you poke it, it lights up. There's no difference between the 75th time and the first time. It just happened 75 times. The 76th time, what's going to happen? You think. But does it have to happen? No, but the way he looks at it, it's psychological. First time happens, we probably say, could be coincidence. Second time, third time, eventually we start saying, okay, it's going to happen. And then all it is just happened a lot. But we see nothing new. The first time, poke, light. 75th time, poke, light. Millionth time, poke, light. No difference except the difference being we've seen it a million times. But we don't see any, it's not like, aha, suddenly, I see the connection. Da-da-da-da. It's just, you poke it, it lights up. You poke it, it lights up. And so
sunrise every day.
Yeah, we get habituated. Sun will come up tomorrow, and we sing about it, and we make musicals about it, and we expect it to happen. Yeah, so Hume says we just become psychologically conditioned. We essentially expect that it's happened before enough times. At a certain point, we believe it's going to happen again. But we have no justification for this, except it's happened a lot. Now, empirically, that's kind of the problem, because there's no difference between first time and millionth time, except our habituation. We just expect it will happen next. Now, of course, the problem then is we don't know, because unless we see, the code, so to speak, that the mechanism that says if poke then light, so to speak, we don't know what will happen the millionth and one time. It may just not do it. Similar like with the sun, it may not, or rather, one day it may not be there. In fact, one day it won't be there. I guess we know that for sure. Well, not for sure, but likely. Now, despite the fact that it's totally unjustified, Hume thinks it's super important. How so? Well, here's how so. The only way we can reason about matters of fact or existence is cause and effect. How so? Well, if we didn't have cause and effect, we can only go by what we're meeting. We'd be like goldfish. Apparently goldfish have like a memory of like a second. That's what people claim. And so every moment would be like new. So we'd never know how things worked. But if we have cause and effect, then we can extend stuff beyond the present. How so? Well, I mean, one obvious example is, why do we believe this room pre-existed our arrival? Well, how long does it take to build a building from it? Yeah, I think it took, took quite a while to do so. And so we're able to, we believe that the building, was constructed and built here prior to us because of what we believe about cause and effect. And so we need cause and effect to extend stuff beyond our immediate perceptions. We have to think that, okay, the laptop was here before now because I wouldn't have like my memories without cause and effect. So we're able to have the concept of like, things that we're not experiencing. Or similarly, we think there's something beneath the floor holding us up because, even though we can't see it because of cause and effect, or there wasn't the building we think would collapse. Now, so we need them. We need this cause and effect thing, even though it's totally unjustified. So Hume ends up with a kind of weird thing. We totally need it, but it's totally unfounded. And here's what he thinks we mean when he uses the terms. The first use of cause, as he sees it, is this. We experience that an object is followed by another, and then we think that all objects like the first one are always followed by objects like the second one. Like, you put the microwave popcorn in the microwave, you push the buttons, turn it on, and you get popcorn. And that happens, and it happens again, and it happens again. So we believe that, heating popcorn creates popcorn. Second definition of cause, as he sees it, is this. The appearance of a cause always conveys to the mind the idea of the effect. We think of popcorn, microwave, followed by popped popcorn. Now, Hume says the problem is, of course, that these don't actually talk about cause. They're actually talking about, well, in the second one, they're talking about us. Psychologically, we think of microwave popcorn and microwaves, we think of popcorn, or we think of fire, we think of smoke. And the first one is we see, we see that fire and smoke are, one followed by the other. But he claims we never see the connection. We don't see fire causing smoke, we just see fire and smoke. We don't see the connection between our ideas, we just have the idea of fire and the idea of smoke. And he uses the example of vibration. He just says that either we mean by, if we say like someone playing guitar that the vibration caused the sound, we mean either that similar vibrations are followed by similar sounds, or seeing the movement of the string, we have the idea of the sound. But neither one actually connects cause to, that makes the causal connection. Or so he claims. But then he closes out by noting, yeah, this is no foundation, but it's super important, so believe in it. And it works this way. He claims it's a matter of custom, essentially, and habit. And it is incredibly useful for the following reasons. Firstly, it's the only thing that makes our experience useful. Imagine if you had no capacity for that habituation. Every time you saw something, imagine your memory is only good like a goldfish for like a second. And so every time you touched the stove, what would happen? Oh, stove burns. You touch it again. Stove burns, stove burns, stove burns, stove burns. Eventually your hand would be destroyed, and that would be bad. So he thinks that because of this, we expect the future to be like the past. So stove burned first time, you say, I expect the stove will burn me the second time, so don't touch the stove. So he claims, firstly, it enables us to predict the future. Secondly, we'd be ignorant of history. We wouldn't be able to have any idea of what happened before. We just have the eternal now. We would not be aware of how to produce the effects we wanted, like making popcorn, or tea, or donuts. And of course, we wouldn't be able to do anything. So if we had no understanding of cause and effect, we wouldn't know how to do anything. We'd just sort of sit there and just die, I guess. That'd be sad. We wouldn't want that to happen. Now, being an historian, Hume connects this to his view of history, as shown by the badly drawn figure with the sword there. Now, he notes that what conclusions we draw about distant time and places, and this is basically being a good historian, he believes we have to trace it back, the perceptions back, to the original event. Which is, true. Because if we couldn't trace things back, we wouldn't have any knowledge of the past. Yeah, it's good history. So, what we have to do, he believes, is all our beliefs to be justified have to trace back, going back to where we started, back to our original perception, or so he claims. So what's his ultimate conclusion here? Well, his ultimate conclusion is this. All our beliefs about matters of fact come from something present to our memory or our senses and our habituation that connects them. So what we do is basically, if something appears to our senses, our habit leads us to expect what follows from that. So for example, we expect that if we apply heat to water, enough heat long enough, it boils. So we're habituated to expect if we want to make tea, we boil water or coffee, and we expect that to happen. Now, we have, he believes, again, no justification for this, because we never, no matter how we look at the water, no matter how we look at the flame, we never see the necessary connection. We just see heat boil. But he claims we can't help it. It's as natural as feeling love towards those who benefit you and hatred towards those who harm you. And he claims it's a purely natural impulse, which no reasoning can produce or prevent. So he ends up basically doing psychology. Crudely put, using the example that came after Hume, everyone's familiar with Pavlov's dog? Yeah, the experiment. What was the experiment that Pavlov did?
He the bell and feeding, and he conditioned his dog right from the bell that he would salivate again.
Yeah, because the dog associated the bell with the thing. Like, same thing with my husky. Whenever, like in the morning after I run, I would always put my glass in the ice maker, and ice again, and then the water, and I would always hand my dog a biscuit, a treat. And so every time she hears that thing go, she's there. She knows, it's treat time. Yeah, and so the thing was that the dog believed that, the bell caused the food. And so what Hume's doing basically is, pre-Pavlov, basically that sort of thing. We're habituated. We apply heat, you get hot water. We expect that to happen. You touch a hot stove, you get burned, you expect that to happen. And so, and of course, Pavlov could, he could ring the bell but not give the dog any food, poor dog. Or he could not ring the bell and give the dog food. Likewise, Hume says we have no basis for reasoning, it's just habituation. We just think it's going to happen. But he says it's something that's absolutely critical, that's totally unfounded, which is kind of sad, but there we go. So next time we will move on to his discussion of senses and objects, in which he claims, nope, haven't got that either. So no cause and effect, no objects, we're doomed, totally doomed. But don't worry, Hume has a solution. He says, don't worry, go to your favorite bar, have a beer, you won't care anymore. For real, that's what he suggests.